So, Dr. Roach, can you tell us the vignettes are and how they're used in research, why people would choose to use them? Just give us a general overview of vignettes.
Yeah, so vignettes are hypothetical situations. We essentially tell a story, and what we want is for a person to make a judgment, in our case, about what a person should do. And what we're looking for is, your perception of what this person might do rather than your perception of what you would do. And so that's kind of cutting that social desirable response, right? Of course I would, in our case, step in and stop someone from being violent to another person, right? So let me give you an example. We have Jesse, who's male, and Quinn, who's female. They're getting ready to leave a party when they get into an argument. Jesse slaps Jamie. And I ask you the question, do you think Jesse should have done that? Should a bystander step in and intervene? Or should a friend of the couple step in and intervene? And these are three separate questions. You get to answer yes, no, or it depends. And then you get to respond written, type it in, because it was an online survey, to tell us why. And so you'll notice that it's very short, very sweet, right? We don't want to throw in a lot of extra stuff because it could potentially muddy the water. And that's where the multiple segment vignettes come in handy. Rather than giving you a full, long description, we're going to add in new information with the new segments.
So that was just the first segment.
That was just the first segment.
Okay, so then for instance, what would a second segment look like?
So our second segment then was the next morning, Jesse apologizes to Quinn and says he knows that he should not have slapped her. Should Quinn forgive Jesse? Oh. Right? And so if you'd thrown that in the first place, you might have been more paying attention more so to the fact that there's a forgiveness piece here rather than to the fact that there's just plain gender and violence present.
Can you explain to us why you don't just ask a person, do you think it's okay for one partner in a romantic relationship to hit another? Is that ever okay? Why don't you just ask that?
Well, I feel like we maybe kind of do when we ask, do you think Jesse should have done that? If we ask it like vaguely, should a person slap their partner? It would just be so kind of up in the air, and generally people are just going to say no, right? If you're reading this vignette and you're seeing that Jesse hit Quinn as they're getting ready to leave a party, you might respond, well, was Quinn trying to drive drunk? Right? And this was the only way to get her attention. And so it kind of gives the room for you to express a potential reason why that may be acceptable.
Somehow a story allows people to do that better than a totally generic question, you think?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. And then that's different from saying, would you have hit your partner? Because that's just completely social desirability. Nobody would ever admit that, even if it was true.
Yes. Yeah.
What did you learn from this study?
Well, we learned that those it depends statements were pretty frequent, especially when it came to self-defense, where if Quinn was female and she was our victim in the scenario, people questioned, was it self-defense? Was she, or if she was, the perpetrator. So was she slapping Jesse because he was attacking her first?
Oh, I see.
And so if that's the case, then that's maybe an acceptable reason. We did get a very small number of people who said perhaps there was a reason in terms of Quinn's trying to leave drunk or whatever it is.
Okay.
And then generally we learned that people are really not willing to say that somebody should step in and intervene unless it's a friend. They're more willing to say, yeah, a friend should do it.
I see.
That they, when it's minor violence, In this case, we had our options were yells at, throws a drinks at, slaps, and punches. And people were way less likely to say, yeah, somebody should step in and intervene if the yelling's happening, or if a drink is thrown, or even if a person's been slapped. The punching, people were much more likely to say, yes, step in. Step in if there's punching. So it varies depending on what's actually happening.
And does it vary based on the gender of the perpetrator and victim also?
It does. So we're much more willing to say, yeah, someone should step in and intervene if it's a male who's perpetrating rather than a female.
Yeah. How interesting. What about the forgiveness question?
Well, people were less likely to say that the person, that Quinn should forgive if Quinn was female. So Quinn shouldn't forgive if her male partner had been violent towards her.
Okay.
And of course that varied, again, depending on the violence itself. Where it's the yelling, you're more likely to say, okay, I can forgive yelling, maybe thrown a drink, not slapping and not punching though.
What were some of the most interesting kind of explanations or exceptions? Did anything surprise you?
I think when it came to the forgiveness piece, the thing that surprised us was the number of people who were willing to say, forgive and stay in a relationship if it was the first time that it happened. If it was repeated, don't forgive and don't stay in that relationship. But if it's just the first time, people also question kind of the severity of the hit. So even though we use the word punch, people kind of said, well, but how hard was it? Was it like the playful, kind of punch, or was it worse than that? And if it's worse than that, then yes, that's a reason to leave a relationship.
And did I think you said that you varied how much the puncher or the hitter or slapper had to drink? Did that affect people's beliefs about the rightness or wrongness of the hit?
So a lot of people said that perhaps alcohol did influence their behaviors, or it made them more likely to hit their partner. But it wasn't a reason to then explain away the action. Okay. So you couldn't say, well, I had 3 beers and I'm really sorry that happened. Like that's an excuse rather than a legitimate reason for why you may have done that. You still should have had enough control to not have hit, even if you were drinking.
So it didn't soften people up to the perpetrator.
No.
No.
Which thankfully, vignettes are often used when social desirability answers are likely, right? Because you would say, of course I would take care of my aging parent when they're sick. But if we tell you a story of someone else, you might answer differently than how you would answer for yourself. We also do it just to get general attitudes about a thing. So if we're interested in, let's say, how nurses are perceived, we can tell a story about a nurse who, is working in a hospital and is taking care of her patients. And, what are your perceptions of this nurse, right? Specific stories often give people that emotional connection that may get to a more, present or more real response than just asking, how do you feel about nurses?
Right, I see.